The stagecoach rattled into Willow Creek, Montana territory, in the summer of 1878, stirring up dust that caught the late afternoon sun like flecks of gold. Margaret Fletcher gripped her small leather suitcase with white knuckles, her heart pounding against her ribs as the vehicle lurched to a stop in front of the town's only hotel. After 6 weeks of grueling travel from Boston, she had finally arrived to meet the man who would become her husband, a stranger who knew her only through 3 exchanged letters, and a daguerreotype that failed to capture her true likeness. Margaret smoothed her travel-worn dress and tucked a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. At 23, she had resigned herself to spinsterhood back in Boston, where her painfully shy nature made her all but invisible in social settings. When her parents died of influenza, leaving her with mounting debts and no prospects, the advertisement in the matrimonial news had seemed like divine providence. Established cattle rancher seeks God-fearing woman of good character for marriage and companionship. Must be willing to embrace frontier life. The driver opened the door. Willow Creek, miss, end of the line. Margaret stepped down, clutching her suitcase like a shield. The main street stretched before her, lined with wooden buildings, a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and the modest 2-story hotel where she was to meet Alexander Jameson. A cluster of women stood on the boardwalk outside the general store, eyeing her with undisguised curiosity. Margaret lowered her gaze to the dusty ground, feeling the familiar tightness in her throat that always accompanied unwanted attention. That her, Jameson's mail-order bride, one woman whispered loudly enough for Margaret to hear. Heard he paid a pretty penny to bring her all the way from Boston, another replied. Don't look like much to me, scrawny little thing. Margaret's cheeks burned as she made her way toward the hotel entrance. Before she could reach it, the door swung open and a tall man emerged. His broad shoulders filled the doorframe, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. When he lifted his gaze to meet hers, Margaret found herself looking into the clearest blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Miss Fletcher?" he asked, his deep voice carrying a gentleness that surprised her. She nodded, unable to form words. "Alexander Jameson." He removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached blonde hair. "Welcome to Willow Creek." Margaret forced herself to speak. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson. Please call me Alex." He reached for her suitcase. "May I?" She relinquished it with a nod, noticing the calluses on his hand as his fingers brushed hers. "I've arranged a room for you at the hotel," he said. "Figured you'd want to rest after your journey before we head out to the ranch." The unexpected consideration caught her off guard. "That's very thoughtful. Least I could do." He gestured toward the door. "Shall we?" As they entered the hotel lobby, Margaret felt the stares of several men lounging in chairs. One whispered something that made the others laugh. Alex's jaw tightened, but he said nothing as he approached the front desk. "Mrs. Henderson," he greeted the older woman behind the counter. "This is Miss Fletcher." Mrs. Henderson smiled warmly. "Welcome to Willow Creek, dear. We've been eager to meet you." "Thank you," Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible. Mrs. Henderson leaned forward. "What was that, dear? You'll have to speak up." She said thank you, Alex interjected smoothly. "Miss Fletcher is tired from her journey." The woman's eyebrows rose. "Well, I hope you find your voice soon, honey. Folks around here like a good conversation." Margaret nodded, wishing the floor would open and swallow her whole. "Room key, please," Alex said firmly. As they climbed the stairs, Margaret heard one of the men in the lobby say, "Jameson's gone and bought himself a mute bride. What's he gonna do with a woman who can't even say howdy?" Alex paused on the landing, his back stiffening. For a moment, Margaret thought he might return to confront the man, but instead he continued up the stairs. At her door, he handed her the key. "Supper's at 6 in the dining room. I'll come by at 1:15 if that suits you." "Yes, thank you." He studied her face for a moment. "Don't mind them, Miss Fletcher. Small towns breed small minds sometimes." The unexpected kindness brought tears to her eyes. She blinked them away quickly. "I'm accustomed to it." Something flickered in his expression, anger perhaps, though not directed at her. "Well, you shouldn't have to be." He settled his hat back on his head. Rest now, we can talk more at supper. When he left, Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. She hadn't expected kindness from this rugged frontiersman. In her experience, men preferred women who could charm a room with witty conversation and easy laughter, everything she was not. She unpacked her few belongings, including her most treasured possession, a small volume of Tennyson's poetry, worn from countless readings. Poetry had always been her refuge, the one place where the words that failed her in person found their voice on the page. At precisely 5:45, a knock sounded at her door. Alex stood in the hallway, his tall frame now adorned in a clean shirt and vest. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair with water. "You look rested," he said with a small smile. "As do you," she replied, immediately regretting the forward observation, but Alex only smiled wider. "Tried to scrub off some of the trail dust. Wouldn't want to embarrass you at your first supper in town." The dining room buzzed with conversation that died down noticeably when they entered. Alex guided her to a table near the window, his hand hovering near the small of her back without actually touching her. No sooner had they sat down than a boisterous man approached their table. "Alex Jameson, so this is your Boston bride?" Margaret shrank in her seat as the man peered at her like she was a curiosity in a traveling show. "Evening, Mayor Thornton," Alex replied evenly. "Yes, this is Miss Margaret Fletcher. Margaret, our town mayor, Horace Thornton." "Pleasure, Miss Fletcher. We've been hearing about you for weeks." He thrust out his hand. Margaret took it briefly, murmuring a greeting too soft to hear. "What's that? Speak up, girl." "She said it's a pleasure to meet you too," Alex translated, though Margaret had said no such thing. "Well, she's a quiet one, isn't she?" The mayor chuckled. "Better teach her to speak up, Alex, or folks'll think you've married a ghost." Several nearby diners laughed. Margaret stared at her empty plate, wishing she could disappear. "Actually, Mayor," Alex said, his voice carrying easily through the room, "I find Miss Fletcher's demeanor refreshing. Too many folks around here talk just to hear themselves speak." The mayor's smile faltered. "Well, I'll leave you to your supper then." He retreated to his own table where he immediately began speaking to his companions in a lowered voice. "I'm sorry," Margaret whispered once he was gone. Alex shook his head. "Don't apologize, you've done nothing wrong, my quietness. It bothers people, not me." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "Truth is, I've had enough noise to last a lifetime." Before she could ask what he meant, the waitress arrived to take their order. Margaret managed to request chicken and potatoes in a voice that, while soft, was audible enough to avoid requiring Alex's intervention. As they ate, Alex told her about his ranch, 500 acres with a small herd of cattle and horses, a vegetable garden, and a creek running through the property. "It's nothing fancy," he said, "but the house is solid. 2 bedrooms, a decent kitchen. I built on a porch last year so I could sit outside and watch the sunset." Margaret tried to picture it. "It sounds lovely." "I hope you'll think so." He hesitated. "Miss Fletcher, Margaret, I want you to know something. Our arrangement. I don't expect anything of you that you're not ready for. I know this is all sudden and we're strangers to each other." The unexpected consideration brought a lump to her throat. "Thank you. We can have a proper courtship if you'd like. He cleared his throat. "I lost my folks young, been on my own a long while. The ranch is doing well, but coming home to an empty house every night, a man starts thinking about family." The simple honesty of his statement touched her. "I understand loneliness, Mr. Jameson." "Alex," he reminded her. "Alex," she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. A commotion at the entrance drew their attention. A group of cowboys had entered, loud and slightly drunk from the saloon. One pointed at their table. "Hey, Jameson. Heard your mail-order bride arrived. Let's have a look." Alex's expression darkened. "Ignore them, they'll move on." But the men approached their table, led by a wiry cowboy with a pockmarked face. This little slip of a thing. Why she don't look strong enough to lift a skillet, let alone help run a ranch." "That's enough, Carter," Alex warned, his voice low. "Has she said anything yet?" another cowboy asked with a smirk. Or did you get cheated and they sent you a mute? Margaret's hands trembled in her lap. She'd endured such mockery her entire life, but sitting here in this strange town, with these strange men leering at her, made the familiar humiliation sharper somehow. Miss Fletcher is tired from her journey, Alex said evenly. And you boys are interrupting our supper. Aw, we're just having some fun, Carter said. Come on, little lady, say something, prove you can talk. Margaret opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. See, mute as a fence post, Carter laughed. What good's a wife who can't even? Alex stood so suddenly his chair fell backward. The room went silent. Miss Fletcher speaks when she has something worth saying, he said, each word precise and dangerously quiet. Unlike some folks who open their mouths just to prove they've got nothing between their ears. Carter's hand moved toward his holster. I wouldn't, Alex said softly. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the mayor intervened. That's enough excitement for one evening, gentlemen. Carter, you and your boys go on back to the saloon. With a final glare at Alex, Carter backed away. Enjoy your silent company, Jameson. After they left, conversation gradually resumed. Alex righted his chair and sat down, his face still tight with anger. I'm sorry, Margaret said. I've caused trouble on my first night here. You didn't cause anything. Carter's had it in for me since I outbid him on the north pasture last year. He took a deep breath. Are you all right? No one had ever asked her that after such an incident. Usually, people just told her to speak up, to stop being so shy, as if it were a simple choice she was refusing to make. Yes, she said. I'm used to it. Well, you shouldn't have to be, he repeated, echoing his earlier sentiment. Then, more gently, your quietness doesn't bother me, Margaret. Truth is, it's peaceful. The sincerity in his eyes made her breath catch. For the first time since arriving in Willow Creek, she felt a flicker of hope. They finished their meal in a comfortable silence. As they left the dining room, several townsfolk nodded in greeting, perhaps more respectful after witnessing Alex's defense of her. At her door, Alex hesitated. I thought we might head out to the ranch tomorrow if you're rested enough. Unless you'd prefer another day in town. After the evening's events, the idea of leaving town appealed greatly to Margaret. Tomorrow would be fine. Good. He smiled, the tension from earlier melting away. We'll leave after breakfast, around 9. Alex, she said, surprising herself by speaking without being spoken to first. Thank you for what you said downstairs. His eyes softened. No need to thank me for speaking the truth. He tipped his hat. Good night, Margaret, good night. As she prepared for bed, Margaret reflected on the day's events. Alexander Jameson was nothing like she had imagined. She had expected a gruff, demanding man who would see her as little more than unpaid help and a means to continue his family line. Instead, she had found someone perceptive and kind, who seemed to understand her silence in a way no one ever had. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Margaret fell asleep with a sense of cautious optimism about the future. The following morning, after a breakfast during which Alex skillfully deflected attention from her by engaging the other diners in conversation about cattle prices, they loaded her trunk onto his wagon. The town was already bustling with activity, merchants opening their shops, a blacksmith hammering at his forge, children racing toward the schoolhouse. It's about an hour's ride to the ranch, Alex explained as he helped her onto the wagon seat. Road gets a bit rough in places. As they left town, Margaret felt the weight of strangers' stares lifting from her shoulders. The landscape opened around them, rolling hills dotted with sagebrush, distant mountains etched against the blue sky. She breathed deeply, savoring the clean air scented with pine and earth. Beautiful, isn't it? Alex asked, noticing her expression. Yes, she replied, very different from Boston. I expect so. He guided the horses around a bend in the road. Must have been hard leaving everything you knew. Margaret considered this. There wasn't much to leave, truthfully. My parents died last winter. The house had to be sold to pay debts. I was staying with a distant cousin who made it clear I was an unwelcome burden. Alex frowned. I'm sorry about your parents. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, "They were good people. My father was a bookkeeper. Very proper, very concerned with appearances. My mother was the same. They never understood why I couldn't, why it was so difficult for me to speak in company." "Some folks are born to fill a room with words," Alex said thoughtfully. "Others observe and listen. World needs both kinds." The simple wisdom of his statement struck Margaret deeply. All her life, she had been made to feel deficient, as if her quietness was a character flaw to be corrected rather than simply a different way of being. "What about your family?" she asked. Alex's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "Lost my ma to cholera when I was 10. Pa raised me on his own until I was 16. He was a rancher too, smaller spread than what I've got now. One winter night, he went to check on a sick calf during a blizzard. Never came back. Found him the next morning, frozen not 50 yards from the house." "How terrible," Margaret said softly. "It was." He was quiet for a moment. "After that, I worked ranch jobs, saved every penny. 5 years ago, I had enough to buy my place. Been building it up ever since." The matter-of-fact way he described such hardship impressed her. Here was a man who had faced devastating loss yet continued forward, building something from nothing through sheer determination. "Is that why you wanted a wife?" she asked, then immediately regretted the boldness of the question, but Alex didn't seem offended. "Partly. Ranch is established now. Time to think about the future, but mostly." He glanced at her, then back at the road. "Gets lonely, living out here by yourself, wanted someone to share it with." The honest vulnerability in his voice touched her. "I understand loneliness," she said again, echoing her words from the previous night. "Reckon you do," he smiled slightly. "Maybe that's why we found each other." The wagon crested a hill and Alex reined the horses to a stop. There it is, Jameson Ranch. Below them stretched a valley cradled by gentle hills. A 2-story wooden house with a wide porch stood near a cluster of outbuildings: barn, corral, smokehouse. A creek sparkled in the sunlight, winding through pastures where cattle grazed. It wasn't grand or imposing, but everything about it spoke of care and attention. "It's lovely," Margaret said, and meant it. Alex's expression softened with pride. "Been a lot of work, still more to do, but it's coming along." As they approached the house, a large dog came bounding across the yard, barking joyfully. "That's Buck," Alex said. "Don't worry, he's friendly, just excited to see the wagon." The dog circled the wagon as Alex brought it to a stop in front of the house. When he helped Margaret down, Buck approached her cautiously, tail wagging. "Hello," she said softly, extending her hand for him to sniff. Buck licked her fingers, then pressed against her skirts, clearly seeking attention. Margaret stroked his head, earning an enthusiastic tail wag. "He likes you," Alex observed, looking pleased. "Good judge of character, Buck is." He carried her trunk into the house while Margaret followed, taking in her new surroundings. The main room was larger than she expected, with a stone fireplace at one end and windows that filled the space with light. The furniture was simple, but well-made: a sofa covered in faded blue fabric, several wooden chairs, a dining table that could seat 6. Bookshelves lined one wall, surprisingly well stocked. "You have quite a library," she remarked, drawn to the shelves. "Reading passes the winter evenings," Alex said. "Feel free to borrow anything that interests you." She scanned the title's history, some novels, practical guides to ranching and animal husbandry. "Thank you, I brought very few books with me." "Kitchen's through there," he continued, pointing to a doorway. "Bedroom upstairs to the right is yours, mine's across the hall, washroom's off the kitchen. It's not fancy, but there's a pump inside for water." Margaret climbed the stairs to inspect her bedroom. It was simply furnished with a bed, dresser, and small writing desk beneath a window that overlooked the valley. The walls had been recently painted a soft cream color, and a colorful quilt covered the bed. "Mrs. Norris from town made the quilt," Alex said from the doorway. "Said a woman would want something pretty for her bedroom." The thoughtfulness of the gesture not just from Mrs. Norris but from Alex, who had clearly prepared the room with care, brought unexpected tears to Margaret's eyes. "It's perfect," she said, her voice catching slightly. "Thank you." Alex shifted, looking slightly embarrassed by her emotion. "Well, I'll let you get settled. Take your time. When you're ready, I can show you around the ranch." Left alone, Margaret unpacked her few belongings, arranging her dresses in the dresser and placing her book of poetry on the bedside table. From the window, she could see the entire valley, Alex's valley. Her valley now too, perhaps, if things worked out between them. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had come here expecting, at best, a marriage of convenience with a man who would tolerate her in exchange for her labor and the children she might bear him. Instead, she had found someone who seemed to value her exactly as she was. When she came downstairs, she found Alex sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread before him. "Just going over some accounts," he explained, gathering the papers. "Ready for that tour." The rest of the day passed in a blur of new experiences. Alex showed her the barn with its 6 horses, the chicken coop, the vegetable garden that needed tending, and the smokehouse where he preserved meat for the winter months. They walked along the creek, where he pointed out the best fishing spots and the place where deer came to drink at dusk. Throughout it all, he explained patiently, answering her occasional questions without pressing her to speak more than she was comfortable with. By late afternoon, they had returned to the house. "Thought we might have supper on the porch," Alex suggested. "It's my favorite place to eat when the weather's good." "I'd like that," Margaret said. While Alex prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits, Margaret set the small porch table. As they ate, the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. "You were right," she said, watching the spectacle. "This is a wonderful place to watch the sunset." Alex nodded, a peaceful expression on his face. "Never gets old." After they finished eating, they sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars appeared overhead. The night was filled with sounds Margaret had never heard: in Boston crickets chirping, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. "Do you miss city life?" Alex asked after a while. Margaret considered the question. "Not yet," she admitted. "Though I've only been here a day." "What about your friends, family?" "I had few friends," she said honestly. "My shyness made it difficult, and as I said, no family to speak of, not close ones anyway." Alex nodded, understanding. "Frontier life isn't easy," he warned. "Winters are harsh. Nearest doctor's in Willow Creek, and even he's not always there. Nearest big town is a 2-day ride." "Are you trying to frighten me away?" she asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. He smiled in the darkness. "No, just want you to know what you're getting into. I won't hold you to anything if you decide this life isn't for you." His consideration touched her. "Thank you, but I'm not afraid of hard work or isolation." "No," he agreed. "I don't reckon you are." The days that followed established a gentle rhythm. Margaret rose early to help with breakfast and learned the routines of the ranch. Alex showed her how to gather eggs without upsetting the hens, how to tend the vegetable garden, and the basics of bread making, a skill he had mastered through necessity, but admitted he would gladly relinquish to her if she was willing. "Never could get the hang of making it light," he confessed after her first successful loaf emerged from the oven. "Mine always came out like rocks." Margaret found herself smiling more frequently than she could remember doing in years. The absence of judging eyes and constant social pressure allowed her to relax. When it was just the two of them, words came more easily. She discovered that Alex was not only kind but intelligent, with thoughtful opinions on everything from cattle breeding to politics. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch, sometimes talking, sometimes reading companionably. Alex had been truthful about enjoying her quiet nature. Unlike others who had tried to change her, he seemed perfectly content with her silences. A week after her arrival, Alex announced they needed to return to Willow Creek for supplies. "We don't have to stay long," he assured her, noting her apprehension. "Just need flour, sugar, few other things. Thought you might want to look at fabric for curtains or such." The idea of facing the townspeople again filled Margaret with dread, but she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. "Of course," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. When they arrived in town the next day, Alex parked the wagon in front of the general store. "Won't take long," he promised. As they entered the store, several women turned to stare. Mrs. Henderson from the hotel approached immediately. "Well, look who's here, Mrs. Jameson to be. How are you finding ranch life, dear?" Margaret forced herself to respond audibly. "It's lovely, thank you." "Is it now, Mrs.?" Henderson raised an eyebrow. "Most city girls find it quite the shock, all that dirt and hard work." "Margaret's adapted well," Alex interjected. "She's already got the garden producing better than I ever did." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened slightly. "Is that so? Well, good for you, dear." As Alex gathered supplies, Margaret examined bolts of fabric, selecting a cheerful yellow cotton for kitchen curtains. She was just completing her purchase when Carter and his friends entered the store. "Well, if it isn't the mute bride," Carter announced loudly. "She's still with you, Jameson." Figured she'd have run screaming back to Boston by now. Margaret froze, the familiar tightness constricting her throat. "We're just leaving, Carter," Alex said evenly, gathering their packages. "Didn't answer my question," Carter persisted. "Has she started talking yet? Or do you just point at what you want, like training a dog?" Margaret felt heat rising in her cheeks. The stares of everyone in the store pressed down on her like physical weight. "That's enough," Alex warned, his voice dangerously low. Carter stepped closer. "What's wrong with her anyway? Is she simple? Or just too high and mighty to speak to common folk?" Something inside Margaret snapped. Years of enduring such mockery, of being spoken about as if she weren't present, of having her worth measured by her ability to make small talk, it all rose up like a tide. "I can speak perfectly well, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice clear and steady in the suddenly silent store. "I simply choose not to waste words on those who have nothing of value to say in return." Carter's mouth fell open in shock. Several people gasped. Alex looked at her with undisguised admiration. "Now, if you'll excuse us," Margaret continued, gathering her composure around her like armor, "we have a long ride home, and I'd prefer to spend it in pleasant company." She took Alex's arm and walked past the stunned cowboy and out of the store, her legs trembling but her head held high. Once outside, she released a shaky breath. Alex loaded their purchases into the wagon, then turned to her with a broad smile. That was something to see. "I shouldn't have lost my temper," she said, embarrassed now that the moment had passed. "Seemed to me you found it, not lost it." He helped her onto the wagon seat. "Been waiting for someone to put Carter in his place for years." As they left town, Margaret felt lighter somehow, as if standing up to Carter had released something long bottled inside her. She wasn't cured of her shyness, she knew it didn't work that way, but for the first time, she had defended herself instead of shrinking away. "I'm proud of you," Alex said quietly as they reached the outskirts of town. The simple statement warmed her more than any elaborate praise could have. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Alex cleared his throat. "Been meaning to ask you something," he said, sounding uncharacteristically nervous. Margaret turned to him. "Yes, we've known each other 2 weeks now, not long in the grand scheme of things, I know, but I've come to." He paused, searching for words. "I've grown fond of you, Margaret." "Very fond," her heart quickened. "I've grown fond of you too, Alex," he smiled, relief evident in his expression. "Good, that's good." He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say is I'd like to make this arrangement official, if you're willing, if you think you could be happy here with me." Margaret had known this moment would come. It was, after all, the reason she had traveled across the country. Yet now that it was here, she found herself emotional in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Before you answer," Alex continued, "I want you to know something. When I sent for a bride, I was looking for companionship, yes. Someone to share the work and maybe someday raise a family with. But since you've been here, I've found something I wasn't even looking for." "What's that?" she asked softly. "Peace," he said simply. "Your quiet isn't something that needs fixing, Margaret. It's a gift. When I come in from a long day and you're there, not filling the air with needless chatter but just being, it's like a cool drink after hours in the sun." Tears filled her eyes at his words. All her life, she had been made to feel that her quietness was a defect. Now this man was telling her it was the very thing he valued most about her. "I would be honored to be your wife, Alex," she said, her voice wavering with emotion, his face lit up with joy. From his pocket, he produced a small ring, a simple gold band with a tiny pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Not fancy, but it's perfect," Margaret interrupted, extending her hand. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned forward hesitantly. She met him halfway, their lips touching in a gentle, tentative kiss that deepened as her arms went around his neck. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "I'll ride into town tomorrow, speak to the preacher," Alex said. "Unless you want a big wedding," Margaret shook her head. "Just us is fine, and maybe Mrs. Norris since she made me that beautiful quilt." Alex laughed. She'd never forgive us if we didn't invite her. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. Mrs. Norris came, along with the preacher and his wife, and surprisingly Mrs. Henderson from the hotel, who brought a cake and admitted she'd been too quick to judge that quiet girl from Boston. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered a different kind of language between them, one that required no words at all. Margaret found that in Alex's arms, her shyness melted away completely, replaced by a boldness that surprised and delighted them both. Afterwards, lying in the darkness with her head on his chest, Margaret felt a contentment she had never known possible. "Happy?" Alex asked, stroking her hair. "Very," she replied. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought I could be." He kissed the top of her head. "You know, when I sent that advertisement, I never imagined I'd find someone like you. A painfully shy woman who can barely order dinner in public," she said wryly. "A strong woman who speaks when it matters," he corrected her. "Who sees everything, understands more than most, and makes this house a home just by being in it." The autumn turned to winter, and Margaret discovered the truth of Alex's warnings about frontier life. Snowstorms isolated the ranch for days at a time. The work was constant and often difficult. Yet she found herself thriving in ways she never had in Boston. Without the constant pressure to be someone she wasn't, Margaret discovered strengths she hadn't known she possessed. She learned to ride, to help with calving, to preserve food for the winter months. She planted an herb garden and began making remedies from a book Alex had in his library. When one of the ranch hands fell ill with fever, it was Margaret's elderberry syrup and cool compresses that helped him recover. Word spread about Mrs. Jameson's healing touch, and occasionally, neighbors would ride for miles to seek her help with minor ailments. Though still quiet by nature, Margaret found she could speak easily when the subject was something she knew well or cared about deeply. Even Carter changed his tune after Margaret helped set his broken arm when he was thrown from a horse miles from town. "You're all right, Mrs. Jameson," he admitted grudgingly as she fashioned a splint. "Reckon I misjudged you." "Reckon you did," she replied with the hint of a smile. Spring arrived, melting the snow and bringing new life to the ranch. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, still Alex's favorite ritual, Margaret took her husband's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I have news," she said softly. Alex's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" 3 months by my calculation. The baby should arrive in late autumn." His face transformed with wonder and joy. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that still made her heart race after nearly a year of marriage. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "So much." "And I love you," she replied, the words coming as naturally as breathing. With Alex, they always did. As darkness fell over the valley, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, content in their shared silence. Margaret reflected on how far she had come from that terrified young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Willow Creek. She was still quiet by nature, still found large gatherings draining, still preferred the company of a few close friends to a crowd of acquaintances. But she was no longer apologetic about these traits. Alex had helped her see that her quietness wasn't a flaw, but simply part of who she was, just as valid as another's exuberance. "What are you thinking about?" Alex asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Margaret smiled. "About how sometimes the things people mock us for are the very things that bring us our greatest happiness." He nodded, understanding immediately. "My peaceful wife," he said, kissing her forehead. "The best decision I ever made was sending for a bride from Boston. And the best decision I ever made was answering your advertisement," she replied. As the first stars appeared overhead, Margaret Fletcher Jameson, once mocked for being too shy, now cherished for that very quality, nestled against her husband's shoulder, perfectly content in the quiet they shared, looking forward to the future they would build together in this wild, beautiful land they both now called home.